everyone. Welcome to 2020 Design Trends by UXPin. Today I'm joined by Scott. And Scott, please tell us a bit about yourself so that we know what is your field of design, your experience and everything, please.
Yep, so my name is Scott Riley. I'm an independent designer. I work with startups, usually in the early stage of their idea process, help them explore their problem space, do a lot of kind of workshops and kind of early stage design, early prototypes, iteration, all that stuff. So I think what people generally used to call UX design, I still don't know what that fully involves after 10 years doing it, but yeah, lots of early stage stuff. Also author of a book called Mindful Design, which is all about understanding how certain mental functions, certain properties of the mind and the brain work, and how we can use them to design responsibly rather than taking advantage of people. But yeah, just generally lots of early stage stuff, lots of process work, lots of early product explorations and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you. You said that can you tell us the name of your book again?
Yeah, it's called Mindful Design.
Mindful Design. So I'm assuming it's a little bit about how you should be use your empathy in your designs, or maybe inclusive design a little bit, because I'm gathering that inclusive design and accessibility will be very huge trend in 2020. Do you think you kind of anticipated that in your book, or just included that somehow, or what do you think? Is it a thing for 2020?
I think it should have been a thing since about 1980, to be honest. It's when we talk about accessibility, it's always kind of been one of those things that I think people treat it as an afterthought after a certain point with the web, of when it hits like a certain maturity where people were like, oh shit, we can actually do cool visual stuff now rather than just pages with blue links and black text. This is fun. I think, yeah, we've casually just like eroded accessibility a little bit in that kind of like newfound period where every website was glowing and full of shadows and image backgrounds and all that fun stuff. I think it's one of those things where there's generally like a give or take on the web. Like we hit a certain point with the super cool, trendy visual stuff that was a little bit absurd but incredible, and kind of went the opposite direction with it, with everything being like flat and minimal and all that stuff. But I do think that generally accessibility has been like really criminally overlooked. And I think as well, like maybe not so much a trend, because it's something that should stay. It's, you know, I think with trends, it's like they come and they possibly go. I think accessibility really is just kind of, it needs to be baked into the process. Like if I'm getting feedback from a client, part of that feedback process should be whether they think it's accessible or not. Like they should understand that. I should be teaching that to clients. If I'm working with a front-end developer, one of us should be able to talk to the other about accessibility without feeling like we're asking the other person to do too much work, right? It's a basic consideration. And I think, you know, design tools now as well, bringing accessibility more into the foreground. I know there's accessibility tools in UXPin, there's accessibility tools coming in other design tools as well. I know whether that's through plugins or whether that's through, you know, kind of immediate product features and stuff like that. Things like colorblind generators are really useful. Contrast and stuff like that being brought in, but they're really the basics for me. And I think people are talking more now, especially in front-end development, about things like, okay, what about people who prefer reduced motion? So we've gone through this big kind of kick of everyone really enjoying animations and lots of like accessible tools bringing accessible for developers, not for users, bringing things like spring physics to the web and stuff like that, where you really can make native feeling incredibly responsive animations, but kind of at the expense of what, and now we're discovering that, oh shit, there's people who really do not need animations in their life. Maybe it gives them migraines, maybe it gives them kind of some ocular issues or whatever. And now we're looking at, okay, how do we design around? How do we kind of, I don't know, step back a little bit from the cool animations and stuff like that. And so I think that's a big thing. I think that when we talk about interaction design and animation, kind of, especially I guess people who've made their career through those things, it can seem like, oh shit, people exist that really do not need my work in their face every time they try and send a message or read an email or anything like that. So I think it's just a lot of growing pains around accessibility where you at first, if you're fortunate enough to be, able-bodied and I guess neurotypical, those things aren't immediate to you and you don't notice them. And then someone's like, well, there's 12 pixel body copy in every design you handed over. What's going on? You can get a bit defensive, or you can get a bit like, oh, great, I'm getting asked to do more work now. And I think, there's a lot of kind of, well, not a lot of, but expected amount of like of pushback when people kind of do kind of talk about that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think it's about finding that balance between, people understanding why these things are being asked about them, developing that empathy, like you said, which is definitely a buzzword, but also kind of important for art design. We talk about it a lot, but just getting that throughout a process. I also think as well, like accessibility isn't just about color blindness and the right kind of contrast and people who need screen readers for whatever reason that may be. I think there's a lot of kind of a mental side to accessibility as well. And I think if you take a step back and think about as accessibility as a way of trying to be less or as exclusive as possible, as inclusive as possible. That's a word, inclusive. If we look at accessibility as being as inclusive as possible, then that needs to be taken into consideration as well. Like, you could design something that passes all the WCAG guidelines in the book. It's perfect contrast. It uses reduced motion when the user needs motion reduced. It takes care of all the visual stuff, all the motion-based stuff, but it can still be incredibly detrimental to someone with anxiety or someone with, for whatever reason, limited cognitive faculty, someone with depression. And I think understanding that's where a lot of my research comes from, and a lot of the work that I do with clients is understanding those potential triggers and understanding how the mental systems that allow for someone to be anxious for a prolonged period of time, or allow for someone to not respond positively to something that someone maybe with, I guess, more of a typical, and I really hate that idea that someone has a typical brain and someone else doesn't, but just someone with more cognitive faculty that they could, sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought ranting about typical there. But yeah, I think just understanding that it's not just about kind of the typical accessibility discussions, and it's not just about, there's no like lighthouse results for whether something causes or increases anxiety or not, right? They're very humanistic things that we need to be aware of. And I think, when you talk about accessibility and inclusivity, I think that conversation, as kind of like the global conversation around mental health, opens up that conversation within our work as designers and developers and clients and product people and everyone else who has a say in what a product does. I think that's super important as well. So I think, maybe not so much a trend, but that approach towards kind of more holistic inclusivity. So taking the typical accessibility stuff, looking at the newer accessibility stuff as new features become, available in browsers and on devices and stuff like that, they generally become available to mainstream, able-bodied, able-minded general public first. And then we look at, oh shit, okay, this is fucking people up who get migraines. This is fucking people up who, are partially sighted. And then we kind of scale back from there. And I think, just that movement towards understanding that every new feature, every new device, every new browser feature that we have, that there are people who may be excluded from that. And to explore that as part of any kind of project exploration, if you want to explore empathy maps, include some technological or some kind of mental health based accessibility issues in there. So you're talking about it at the very early stages of your process rather than handing something over to a front end developer and just being like, cool, make sure a screen reader can speak this, thanks. Like, so yeah, I hope that that's what we're getting more towards. And I think the discourse is there, and we're seeing a lot of people talk more about accessibility. People demand it more.
Yeah.
And that's coming from all angles as well. Developers want to develop accessible experiences. Designers want to design with accessibility in mind at the ground floor. So I think, yeah, as time goes on and these discussions carry on, then it's something that really will become front and center of everyone's process, I hope.
Yeah, so it's thank you. I think it's becoming like a new, maybe a new trend or something that is not like an extra but a necessity, but it is rooted deeply in the needs of humans, of people, right? Like really historically, it's not very new. But this is what I would say. This one part of the business that where brands or like product want to be more human, right? But you said that, well, you mentioned that technology is like maybe helping us, like the designers, product builders, to be more accessible. But do you think that there's just this whole other level of design that maybe there are new needs or like new, completely new possibilities for designers or product builders with which come with AI, for example? Because what I'm trying to say is the accessibility or inclusive design is something that we should have had like years ago, right? Because it's like only human. But there's this whole new part like AI design or like computational design that people are afraid of, but maybe there's some link between what is new and what we need, right? I don't know, what's your idea for like AI in design?
I think there's been a lot of kind of experiments and a lot of failed products that have revolved around like kind of almost completely automating a design process, or at least kind of I think a lot of people think of AI and they have like this really almost offensively libertarian outlook on it, where it's like, oh, if computers can do everything for us, then that's gonna make people money, and we can sit back. And I think really kind of without getting preachy, I think that it's very, very difficult to talk about AI and to talk about something that intrudes at least on people's jobs, or potentially reduces the perceived value of someone's work, while we're in a system of, especially in tech, of like rampant capitalism, right? It's very difficult to talk about something that could potentially be a benefit to someone's process while like kind of systematically removing jobs and affecting people's lives just from a societal perspective. I think, in my opinion, as a designer and as someone who has a kind of love-hate relationship with AI, where I think that as a tool, as a embellishment to my process, it could be really useful. But at the same time, as something that is celebrated for the kind of what I would see as potential negative impacts, especially on the perceived value of people's work, then yeah, I think it's quite difficult to get excited about it, or to at least think, oh yeah, what we really need right now is rampant artificial intelligence that's going to take over all our processes. I think for me, like something that I've seen a few times and that people have benefited from is AI as kind of like almost like an assistant to the design process. So rather than being, yo, here's all my data, here's everything I need, all the content I need to design around, like magic me up a layout, please. That's my job done. It's been more about like concept generation. So, I think as humans, we're really good at making a decision based on a limited data set, whether that's kind of looking at pure data and deciding kind of what's important and what's not, or whether that's looking at kind of multiple design concepts and deciding what's best for a given scenario. I think the not so much the pointless part of design, because there is value in the craft, but I think something that the least efficient part of design is actually generating those concepts. So if I'm like drawing a box out and putting some text in it and being sick, that's a button that looks great. Part of the design process from there is like, does this button fit with the visual style of the product if it's an existing product? Is the color of the background color of this button something that I'm going to be able to propose as a brand color or a primary color and something like that? And then it's kind of like, okay, well, what would it look like if it was green instead of blue? What would it look like if it used 2-pixel character spacing instead of 1? Like all those questions and all those kind of different versions, you're producing a different state of the button, or you're producing a different variant of the button. Like that kind of stuff is what I think really, there's no decision making in there. It's just, okay, turn it green, space the characters out a bit more. And a button is like a silly example, right? Because we don't sit there and make 500 variants of a button. But you think of like larger components that maybe they've got a head and paragraph text, a button, an image, just like a standard media box component, for example. I think it's very easy to just settle on one of the first couple. Just like, yeah, sick, that's great. It's a 4-pixel radius. It's got this little drop shadow on it. It looks cool. Let's keep it. And I think there's value somewhere in artificial intelligence in the generation of those concepts, and look at stuff that has worked well before in specific concepts and specific contexts and spit out 5 or 6 different versions, but then still have actual human designer make that decision. So we're not like, I wouldn't, just as much as I wouldn't want someone to empower bureaucrats at a like postal company to get rid of my delivery people, right, with drones and fucking artificial intelligence. I don't want to empower kind of founders and bureaucrats in tech companies to replace developers or designers with artificial intelligence as well. But I think as tools of the workers, there's room for artificial intelligence in like concept generation or comparison or just assistive to the worker rather than as a replacement for the worker. That's my socialist rant out the way. Okay. There's a guaranteed socialist rant in every chat I have, by the way. So that's ours.
Thank you. So I guess when it serves humans, you're like pretty okay with that.
Yeah. I think it's still, it worries me as a technology. Yeah. But it worries me as a technology because of the system it exists in, not because of its capabilities, if that makes sense. Yeah. It's more the intention behind its use rather than, debating whether it's useful or not.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that with every tool. You can do a lot of things with a hammer as well, right? Yeah. So AI is just basically the same. Okay, so I'd like to ask you, what is your personal favorite emerging trend that you think is going to be really like hip in 2020?
I think it's a pretty boring one, and it's something we spoke about like at the very start of this chat. And I think it's just about more of a focus on inclusivity in design and more of a focus on, I've noticed like at least, and this might just be confirmation bias on my side, but since writing my book, the people I've worked with, whether that's other designers, whether that's developers, whether that's clients, founders, people who've hired me as an advisor, generally there seems to be like a more kind of a bigger acceptance of like systemic thinking and inclusive thinking, and people, and this is something I've noticed in my career, is kind of maybe even as close as a few years ago, people weren't as aware of the social impact of technology as they are now. And I feel like the clients that I've worked with, and because of the state of my work, I generally work with people for 3 to 4 months, and then that's it. They go off and they build it a higher fidelity. They build it with a larger team or whatever. So I work with a lot of people throughout a year, really, at the very early stages of it. And I think I am noticing people kind of I don't know, just generally giving more of a fuck when they when they start a project. Yeah, so that's my favorite trend, giving a fuck. I think there's a lot of examples of people going in the opposite direction with that and stuff, but I think in technology, yeah, there's a discourse around inclusivity. There's a discourse around the potential negative impacts of design. There's a lot of a lot more openness than I think I've seen previously for people who realize that, okay, we're not just building out this thing that's going to be positive for everyone. This could be harmful in some way. What's the social impact of this? If this is used incorrectly, how could that cause harm to other people and stuff like that? I think definitely a bit of confirmation bias, because they're the questions I ask at the start of projects anyway, but people seem to understand it a lot more these days. They seem to understand or have already thought about the social impact of their work, their idea. You're talking about people who've got tens of thousands of dollars to invest in a product, who are starting to understand that, okay, we might be invested in something that could be used to cause harm. Whereas maybe 5 or 6 years ago, it was pure optimism, and it was, we want to pay you to make this thing that we know is going to be amazing. And it's like, yeah, cool. That's how Twitter got full of Nazis. Thanks. So people seem to be more aware of kind of the negative impacts, the potential negative impact of technology. And I think that should continue. I think people should have a bit more cynicism in their early ideas, and they should feel like anything that seems like a pure net positive probably isn't. And there's probably just something they haven't explored with a feature idea, or based on like their myopic view of a problem space. So I think people are more open to exploring that kind of stuff and exploring social impact. So yeah, I don't think it's a hip, cool trend. It's not variable fonts. It's not Pantone color of the year, but it's something that I've seen that makes me happy. So we're getting there, I think.
Yeah, well, I think at the end of the day, it's really optimistic what you said, because as long as we stay humans and like keep the technology like in human hands, and to make it the most usable to humans, right, to all of us, I think we're fine as long as we're just taking care of each other, right, with the design, with the technology as well. So I would like to thank you, Scott, very much for joining our interview today. It was very insightful. Thank you for sharing your experience and your thoughts. So see ya.
No worries. Thanks for having me. It was really cool.